a sure basis for the structure of government. So in other words, we have to have these things if our system is going to work. The three crucial elements of self-government. And that's what we're seeking out to do, y'all, is to create a nation on a principle of self-government. So like I said, except for a handful of the Dutch states, and I mean, maybe going back to ancient Athens and Rome, which is appropriate, you don't see much example of this. So don't have to write the quote. It's in the PowerPoint. And I'll update the PowerPoint again. So let's look at each one. Now, the book references this idea of a virtuous people. And so Jefferson even writes about us being a republic of virtue. Okay, a republic of virtue. And so here is the quote from the Baron de Montesquieu. You may remember the name Montesquieu. Virtue is defined as the love of the law and of our country. We kind of think of this as patriotism, patriotic, fervor. It requires a constant preference of public to private interest, the source of private virtue. All right. In other words, the thing that makes you a decent person is virtue. It's like the opposite of vice, right? So without getting religious, and talking about like sins and non-sins, what he's saying is virtue is a characteristic of really necessity for our country, civic virtue. Now he's drawing on, as are a lot of these folks, and again, you don't have to write these past people down, but I've written down many of the philosophers that you would have found in the biography, in the library of Thomas Jefferson, of James Madison. Now, Washington wasn't a literary student. He only went to school to about fourth grade, but he was versed in what people talked about. Like he knew who Cicero was. He knew who Cincinnatus was. So they studied, as was popular in the period, the Greeks and the Romans and the emerging writers of the Enlightenment. And so that influenced them. Men like Washington, Adams, Franklin, Paine, Mason, Madison, Patrick Henry, and of course, Thomas Jefferson. So what is civic virtue? Now, these are quotes about civic virtue from Jefferson and then later from others. But a nation is a society that forms a moral person. One of the things I believe about America that says a lot about our country is how we treat the less fortunate in our country, how we care about each other. One of the things that's been so awful for me about this pandemic is not only the fact that 210,000 people have died, which is an absolute tragedy, but the vast majority of them have been elderly people who had to die alone. And that is just awful. You understand? So caring about your fellow members of your society, one of the things I hate doing is driving around Pennsylvania County and seeing garbage thrown everywhere on the roadside. I hate it because it shows the lack of concern, not only for property, which is important, but for your neighbors and the people you're around. It's like we don't care about each other anymore. And that's not virtuous citizenry. Okay? No government can continue good, but under the control of the people. And again, that's a quote I already read. In the manners, we must preserve a republic ignorant. Degeneracy is cancer, which eats at the heart of the law. Dependence becomes subservience and being spoiled. All right? Prepares tools for ambition. Liberty is the parent of science and virtue. So virtuous behavior means, holding yourself upright, ethical, and devoted to your country. Here you see Jefferson directly comments on Montesquieu. He quotes Montesquieu, all right, in this writing. When virtue is banished, ambition invades the mind. See, if we elect leaders who are ambitious and are using their office to benefit themselves and not the public, then our country is in decline. Okay? If that happens, greed possesses the whole community. Greed. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to make money. But when greed overcomes what is in the best interest of your neighbors and your community and your country, then you are no longer a virtuous society. If we will destroy a generation environment or the debt for future generations for our own personal greed, that is not virtuous behavior. You cannot have individual happiness, he says, without virtue. By the way, it keeps going and going. Adams writes about virtue. Public virtue, private virtue. Liberty cannot exist without virtue and independence. Our Constitution was for moral people. Okay. So they're frequently on alert. Now, I would not say that it is the job of the government to control people's morality. It is the job of the citizen to make that distinction. So, and here more and more on it. You see Adams writing about honor and virtue. And again, I post this stuff. So being decent people, that's, if you think back to it, these people were trying to do, to make something better for not only themselves and their children, but for the future people. They're contributing to a cause greater than themselves. That's virtuous. When you see firemen risk their lives to run into a building that other people are running out of, when you see nurses going into a building where there are thousands and hundreds of people that are ill, that's virtuous, because it's not doing it for the paycheck. You're doing it because it's the thing that has to be done. Okay? Even more here. Benjamin Franklin, only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have to have owners. They have to have masters. They have to have people control them. If you misbehave and see, there's another concept with virtue. It's ordered liberty, meaning you have freedom, but you have to have restraint. You have to exercise self-control, because freedom is temptation. All right. Second major theme. You must have, and by the way, Thomas Jefferson definitely put his money where his mouth is here. He, for a decade, tried to get a bill passed in the Virginia General Assembly to create public education in America, in Virginia, and it failed. People did not want to pay money to send other people's kids to school. So we didn't have public education in Virginia for a long time. But we did have our first public university, and that was created by Thomas Jefferson. This is the University of Virginia. He created it. He designed the grounds. He designed the curriculum. He hired the professors, all of which with the intent to educate the public. All right. This is my belief. This is why I'm a teacher. I'm not a teacher to get you for a job preparation. I'm a teacher to prepare you to be a citizen in the greatest country on earth. But, that's my responsibility, my duty. Okay. If we think people not enlightened enough to exercise their control, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to teach them. I want you to be free. I don't want you to be, brainwashed automatons, right? But you have to have good judgment then. And he writes a lot about education. Now, what does this have to do with the revolution? This is what he's fighting for. Every government degenerates when trusted to the rulers. The people are its only safety. Their minds must be improved. The most important bill in all our laws is to spread knowledge to people. That's how you preserve freedom and happiness. Jefferson fought a crusade against ignorance, he says, to educate the common man. Above all else, I hope the education of the common person will be attended to. So Jefferson was, in many ways, a father of education here in Virginia. And I give you this to show you that I read lots of letters. And as you can see, this is probably the greatest quote you'll hear attributed to him routinely. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. So if you expect to be educated and free, if you want to be an ignorant person, uneducated, then you will never be free. Because Jefferson viewed ignorance as chains that bind you. Okay? And he wanted primary schools. Even further, writing to UVA, writing to another friend, writing to another friend. The qualifications for self-government are not innate. That's very fascinating. You are not born with the instinctive knowledge on how to self-govern as a society. They are the result of habit and training. All right, you have to learn how to do this stuff. This is something we create as humans, the idea of law and government. And then lastly, and just as important, We cannot have liberty, he said, without a free press. Here you can see, no stamped paper, the join or die, the Virginia Gazette, which published some of his writings. Our liberty cannot exist but by the freedom of press. All right. The basis of our government must be the opinion of the people, right? But how are they going to be educated if they don't have access to newspapers? This is what he says. I love it. If it were left to me to decide whether to have a government without newspapers or a newspaper without government, I would not hesitate to choose the latter. I'd take newspapers over government. Okay? Freedom of the press. The press is the only cure for a nation. When it is silenced, all means of a general effort are taken away. You can't fix what's wrong if you don't know what's wrong, right? Only security is a free press. Writing to Lafayette. So I find it very interesting. Our liberty cannot be guarded but by the freedom of press. So when we talk about today and American history today, people will often talk about the media being biased, or and the issue is that the media has always been biased. Bias doesn't make information necessarily not factual. We've been reading and studying perspective and point of view. That's always been present. It's your duty to sift through that information and to find correct factual information in order to make decisions as a society. So the answer free press here means not owned by the government, not censored or regulated by the state. Doesn't mean without cost. Although I will show you here in a few minutes ways to get free information right to your email without paying anything for it that is not biased. It's filtered through a presenting multiple sides to the story where you can read both or all sides if possible. So when we talk about a free press, we're talking about free from government security or censorship, not without any fee or cost. So free means, not restrained, like freedom of speech, not limited by the government. We'll stop for a moment, and so we can talk about that a little bit.